We're here today at the Day of Remembrance with Greg Richardson, Executive Director of the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs. Greg, welcome.
Thank you, Donica. Good to be here.
It was great to hear what you had to say. I appreciate everything that you spoke to the Native peoples. Do you think the mission was accomplished here today with the Day of Remembrance?
Yes, I do. I think it's a good start, but I think there's a lot more work to be done. And as you heard from all of the speakers, I think there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of need. So my hope is that today will trigger a new effort in the United States to remember today the Trail of Tears, to remember some of the other travesties that occurred in Indian country in the United States.
Absolutely, and we've spoken about how this is part of a process. What do you see are some of the future steps to this process?
Well, I think there's definitely got to be some consistency. I think one event won't really do what we need to get done. I think tribal leaders and others need to join hands across regions and across state lines in terms of having some other commemoration type days for events like this. You know, the Trail of Tears didn't just happen in 1838 and end. In some ways, the Trail of Tears is still existing because there's just so many needs among our population. I mentioned the diabetes issue, but I could talk about the issue with drugs in our communities. I could talk about the housing needs of our people, the fact that we have very few American Indians represented in many government agencies at decision-making levels. And I think we tend to be a forgotten people. Someone else asked today earlier about some of the work that I do, and I made a reference to an issue I dealt with just last week in Raleigh when I got a report. And they asked me to distribute that report to the Indian tribes and the Indian leaders in North Carolina. When I opened up the report, there was some data in there, but the data didn't even address American Indians. So I diplomatically followed up with an email back to the person that sent that to me, and I said, I couldn't send that. I can't send that to our tribes. And the question was why? I said, we're not represented in the data. I said, they will get all over me about sending information out to them, and we're not even represented in the data. So, you know, time and time again, we're having to address those types of issues here in North Carolina, county by county, where our people are left out in terms of being included, whether it's voting data. And we're all now listening to a lot of issues about voting because it's election year. My interest is to advocate for, in terms of our tribal leaders, looking at that data and calling attention to it, county by county, region by region, and then, of course, the state data down in Raleigh at the Board of Election, State Board of Elections. The last data that I looked at shows that we do have a good number of American Indians in North Carolina who are actually registered to vote, who actually vote, and there are some shifts in that data, and I won't go into all the detail, but you know, people can look at that data for themselves and glean from that some trends that are going on. Our people are, I think, thinking is changing quite a bit, and our people are becoming more engaged. So we need to be at the table when decisions are made. It's not fair, I don't think, in some cases legal, for American Indians to be left out of the decision-making processes. But it's up to us to call attention to that. If we're not having days of remembrance like today, although today we're remembering the Trail of Tears and all of the atrocities that came with that, there's just much more that we need to address because the Trail of Tears is really not over.
Exactly, and I think that's a very valid point. This is the beginning of a process. The Trail of Tears went all the way from Virginia down through the south to Oklahoma. It's more than one state.
Right, more than one tribe.
More than one tribe. Speaking of which, your background is?
My tribe is Hallowasaponi from the eastern part of the state. And we weren't affected by the Trail of Tears, but we were affected by other trails of tears. Discrimination, no schools. When I was a kid, our parents in our community had to build our own school. There were schools for African Americans or blacks at that time, schools for whites, no schools for Indians. So our community had to rally together and put up the one-room school first and the two-room school. And that's the way I started out my education in the state of North Carolina. Over time, we were able to get state support for a school, but it took a lot of legwork and a lot of money out of the pockets of our parents to do that. Should not have had to have done that.
Well, I thank God for his raising you up to where you are now, that you have a voice to make these changes in our nation through laws and through reconciliation. Thank you so much, Greg Richardson, Executive Director, North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs.